Americans are heading to the polls to vote for their next president. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump would each need more than 270 electoral votes to win. So who will it be? Well, that we'll know after November 20th. But joining us in the DD India studios today is Christopher Elms. He's a spokesperson for the US Embassy. Christopher, thank you for joining us here on DD India. An important day for Americans today. You voted already, as you told me.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Jessica. I voted as an overseas voter. We have the opportunity as Americans to vote wherever we are in the world. So I mailed in my ballot from India, and as many Americans are voting from overseas and mailing in their ballots as well.
So how do the US elections differ from those in other democracies in terms of structure, in terms of how technically they're conducted?
So yeah, as you mentioned, we have a presidential vote happening. Everyone seems to be aware of that one. What a lot of people don't know is we are voting up and down the ballot at every level of our federal government. As well as our municipal and state governments. So we have a very decentralized system in the United States. I'm currently voting in my state for the president, for one of my senators, for my congressperson, for the state assembly, state senate, for the district attorney, so the chief prosecutor for my county, for my town clerk, for my town justice, for county judges, for state Supreme Court judges, for amendments to our Constitution, to the state constitution. There are all sorts of things that are going to be up and down everyone's ballots that they'll be voting on. And so naturally, a lot of the focus around the world is on the president, but Americans are voting on dozens of different elections on their ballots, hundreds across the United States.
Right, and when you talk about popular vote, I mean, in the last election that we saw, President Biden clinched victory with just marginal number of votes, and that was from the state of Georgia, which saw a hot contest. Before that, in 2016, Hillary Clinton came too close, but most often seem to fail to comprehend the intricate structure that is on how does the vote get decided? How does an election candidate win at the end of the day?
Yeah, so the US system is not based on an overall vote. It goes state by state. And so when our country was founded, there was a compromise made. We have a Senate where every state gets 2 votes, and then you have proportional representation in Congress where states get a number of votes based on their population. When you add that together, that's the number of votes that are going to decide the Electoral College. So a state like California that has 2 senators and dozens of other representatives has more votes than a state like Montana, which is going to have 2 senators plus 1 representative. And so the Electoral College, state by state, is actually a representation of the representatives in Congress. And so the winner of the presidential election is going to be the person that has the most Electoral College votes based on the number of votes by each state.
And this time it's Pennsylvania, if I'm not wrong, which is something which would be a decider, is that?
There are a number of states where it's a toss-up and we don't know who's going to win. And that actually changes every election cycle. So you mentioned Pennsylvania, you mentioned Georgia. There are others like Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina that people are focused on. But it isn't necessarily one state every time. In past elections, Florida was a decider. Ohio has been a decider. Colorado has been a decider. When you look at some states that are changing how they're allocating their Electoral College votes, Maine and Nebraska actually don't give all of theirs to one candidate. They break it down by district. And so it's quite complex, I recognize, but what it represents is that Americans are choosing their candidate, and who is going to make that decision is really up in the air every year. And so you'll see a huge turnout of crores of Americans voting, and we don't know which state is going to be the ultimate decider.
Right, and talking about candidates, you know, it was important to see on how it all, you know, shaped at the end of it all. We had Kamala Harris, who was, you know, given a go-ahead by Joe Biden, and then we had Donald Trump from the Republicans, who was elected from the primary race after, you know, a lot of his opponents pulled out. But in the United States, there's a 2-party system compared to other democracies where there's multi-party system. So, you know, how challenging does it get for the electorate to have very limited choices in terms of parties?
Well, as an American, I'm really lucky at the number of choices I have, actually. So, as I mentioned, I am voting on a president, but I'm voting on governance at all levels. And the way that our system was set up is that there are these checks and balances where the people are choosing at every level. So in the United States, we have 3 main branches of government: the executive, which is the president, the legislative, which is our Congress, and our judiciary. As an American, I get to vote at for each one of those, the legislative, executive, and judiciary branches at various different levels, at the district level, the state level, the federal level. And so while there are two main parties, there are choices around the country that we're able to choose. And actually, even among those presidential votes, there are going to be a lot more than two candidates on the ballot. So you mentioned the Republican candidate Donald Trump and the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris. There is a Green Party candidate, there is a Libertarian Party candidate, there are independent candidates. And in prior years, some of these have made the difference in the vote. They might very well make the difference this year, because there are additional choices beyond those two. It's just that two large parties do garner most of the votes.
So the choices made available tend to sort of cater to the audiences or people, all walks of life. They do not need multi-party system. They are getting it from the candidates who are represented from their local
In addition, we have a say in who the candidates are. So you mentioned that former President Trump made it through the primaries. There was a debate among the Republican Party of who they would nominate. So the Republicans actually chose their candidate. So it wasn't as if something that was decided for them. So there's even choice in choosing the candidate, and that's happening at various levels as well.
What issues do you see dominate this election? I know it's inflation, I know it's immigration, there's abortion, Roe v. Wade, but which one do you think has stood out in terms of people really focusing on at this point?
I mean, I think you've named a lot of quite important ones. It's very common that in the United States, people are focused on the economy. What matters to them is oftentimes what their economic prospects are, what they see as development. Oftentimes in the United States and elections around the world, there's also a decision being made on the incumbent versus the newcomer. And so as you're looking at the votes that are happening up and down the ballot, people will also be making a general decision of, has this person represented my equities? Have they been a representative for me? Or do I need someone new that can better represent what I'm looking for?
Does foreign policy also cross the mind of the voters? Yes, the domestic issues are important, I agree. But does foreign policy factor in when they go out and vote as to how their leaders or the potential candidates out there would align with their idea?
Absolutely. And there are going to be people that are particularly focused on one foreign policy versus another. But what you're going to see is foreign policy in all of these different aspects. The U.S. economy is a global economy. We recognize that our strength comes from our trade, our international investment, the movement of goods and people across borders, and so foreign policy comes into that. It'll also matter on those that care about election. That's obviously a foreign policy issue because people are coming from across the border, but it also has to do with what are the conditions in the country from which they are coming. So foreign policy is going to be something that people care about independently, but also in how it influences the economy, immigration, anything that folks might be interested in, the environment, climate change, all sorts of things.
Right, and we've seen over the years that no matter what administration is in the White House, the relationship with India has flourished over the last many, many decades. We hope that that would continue moving forward, whoever comes to power and whoever seals the deal in the next 1 month. Talking about India and US collaboration in the recent past, we also saw Prime Minister Modi was at, it was in New York, and he was also at Delaware where he met President Biden, perhaps the last time one would see President Biden in his official duty there, and the Quad met. These strategic convergences between India and United States, especially in telecommunications and semiconductor, is picking up pace. And how would you describe this relationship moving forward, where there is a lot of technological exchange which was perhaps not visible earlier but has picked up a lot of pace now?
More than hope that whatever administration comes into power, US-India relations will continue on the right track, I am assuring you that regardless of which candidate wins the presidential election, you're going to see continued growth in the US-India relationship. That was true when it was former President Trump. That's been true during the current Biden-Harris administration. And so you have a proven track record from both of these candidates that they want a better relationship with India. As you noted, that's also true among the major political parties in both countries. So whether it's Democrats or Republicans in the United States, or whether it's Congress or the BJP here in India, you have widespread support for a better US-India relationship. And that is bearing out in the meetings that we have at the highest levels. You mentioned Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States and to President Biden's home in Delaware just a month and a half ago. But it's happening at every level of our governments. And so one thing that we have emphasized, as you note, is the elevation of our relationship to look at new and emerging technologies. One aspect of it is our breakthrough agreement, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, ICET. Part of it is on semiconductors. During the meeting in Delaware that the President and Prime Minister had, they announced new agreements on semiconductors. We have not just on the civilian side, but an agreement with Bharat Semi, Third Eye Tech, and the U.S. Space Command on semiconductors. And so things are really moving at a fast level and happening at this elevated technological level that I think you see why the United States calls this the defining partnership of the 21st century.
That also includes the defense partnership. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the defense partnership is growing immensely as well. We've had huge exchanges between our militaries. We had a wonderful Malabar exercise that just happened down in Vizag a few weeks ago. And the military relationship, the civilian relationship, the tech relationship, our people-to-people relationship, where a quarter of students in the United States, a quarter of international students are Indian. I think those ties, the people-to-people ties that bind us, it's just going to continue.
Talking about people-to-people ties, it's been 2 years since you've been here in India, and you say you've traveled to more than 20 cities and you plan to cover more. So what's on the bucket list and how has it been so far here?
It's been wonderful so far. I absolutely love living in India. I love the food, I love the culture, and of course I do love the travel. I think on the bucket list, I love the wildlife safaris. I haven't had the opportunity to get to Gir National Park yet. I would love to see the Asiatic lions there. I would love to, I have two young sons, I would love to have them see more of the temples across this country. My sons love going and seeing the holy places of worship here, such a spiritual place in India. And so it's unfortunate in some respect that there's just so much to see here. I'll never be able to explore it all, but I'm going to do my best to see as much as I can.
Well, all the best with that endeavor and hope you have a lot of fun and your sons too. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you.